Another thing that's important is being able to handle pressure. Boy, this is so true. You know, there are all different types of pressure, and I want you to explain why this is so important when we're thinking about getting a capable assistant.
You know, pressure is just a way of life, right? I mean, whether in our lives and also in our businesses, but you can't let it get to you. And the way to ensure that, I always say, is good communication between the executive and the assistant. Because if the assistant is comfortable in understanding what you want, whether you're there or not, they can perform. And if they are confident in what they're doing, if they know what you want them to do, if they have the basic skills to get the job done, that takes a lot of the pressure off them. But if you're not communicating with them, if you're not helping them to understand how you want things done, how the business is run, that ends up causing a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. But I think a lot of the pressure that assistants experience is time pressure. You know, things getting changed constantly, a lot of people coming at them at the same time asking for things. So the assistant has to be aware, when you're interviewing the assistant, you have to be aware to tell them, look, this is the situation that we have constantly, and you can't be flustered, you can't drop the ball, you can't be rude to people on the phone just because you're busy and because you're under a lot of pressure right now. So it takes a lot of communication in the beginning, and it also takes communication when the executive is giving the assistant a lot of work to say, listen, I know you've got a lot on your plate right now. We'll get through this. We'll handle it. You know, just take the pressure down just a little bit and help them to work through it.
All right, I want to switch gears to the hiring process for an assistant. How is it different than maybe other hiring processes, or is it not any different? What specifically does a leader, a high-functioning person who wants an assistant, what do they need to be doing in the hiring process?
So here's the thing, you know, the challenge with hiring an assistant is because the definition of the role of assistant is so varied. And it depends on the organization and what it is that they're looking for. So a lot of the time, the first thing that the executive has to do in hiring an assistant is to really sit down quietly and say, okay, what does this company need? What do I need? What are the things we must have? Because if you don't analyze that, when somebody gets in front of you and you're interviewing them, you may get sidetracked. You might say, well, I like this person's personality, or I like the fact that they worked for this person before, and all kind of ancillary miscellaneous things come into consideration when the first consideration needs to be, what is it that we need in this business? What is my work style? Am I a micromanager? Am I a big picture person? Do I need somebody who needs to be managed? Do I need somebody who is able to take the ball and run with it? You have to really sit down and examine what it is you need and what your business needs. And then based on that, you hire the correct personality fit and the correct capability fit for you.
Now, one of the things you talk about in the book is the idea of self-evaluation. You have to understand yourself in order to hire an assistant who's a good fit for you. And I think this is a massive blind spot for so many people. If you can make the list and say, okay, this is what I need, but I'd love to spend a little bit of time talking about this back and forth. When you get that right person, and in the hiring process, you want to find somebody that's not just a personality fit, but maybe has strengths, has strengths where you have weaknesses and so forth and so on. And if we're not aware, then we're really hampering that assistant, not just the hiring process, correct?
Yes, you know, so this is knowing yourself, right, is really, really important. And don't hesitate to say, this is what I need and this is what I want. I'm seeing a trend a lot with younger executives, for example, who say things to me like, well, who am I to ask her to do that for me? And I say to them, you're the person who is paying them a salary so they can send their kids to school and put food on the table and put clothes on their back, you know. So don't say, who am I to ask them? They're there to do what the business needs them to do. So you need to be very, very clear about that. And a lot of the time I'm seeing also now the trend is to tell assistants, almost like the being an assistant is secondary to what they want to do in the role. So, there are lots of adjacent opportunities to being an assistant to an executive. And a lot of assistants are focusing on those adjacent opportunities as opposed to, this is what the executive really needs right now. This is what they've asked you to do. This is the priority. Focus on that. And if you find your assistant is not doing that, you need to have a conversation with them about it. Don't be afraid to say, this is what we need you to do in the business.
Now, how big of a fan are you of sharing the personality profile, strengths, weaknesses? Is this done prior to the hire or after the hire?
Oh, it has to be done prior to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, yeah. The evaluation has to be done before. I know that there are some executives who are very, very good with their gut instincts, and they'll hire based on that. No matter what else they're seeing, they say, my gut is telling me this person is a good fit. So they'll hire that person. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Donald Trump said to me in the book interview that hiring is a gamble. You in the end, you really don't know how that person is going to work out until they're actually on board and you're seeing them in action. And I've seen this too, where I have very, very good instincts, and on top of that, I know what's required to do the assistant job. But once in a while, an assistant will come on board and their personality is just not meshing, or they have an agenda on where they want to go and things like that. Sometimes you have to roll the dice, but a lot of the time you can really do your homework and trust your instincts. When you're doing business, you trust yourself, you trust your instincts, you do your homework. So do the same thing when you're hiring an assistant. It's really no different hiring an assistant as there is to hiring a CFO or somebody like that. So do your homework.
Now, you've talked to so many business leaders on this issue. I'm just curious, as you've interviewed them and spent time talking through their answers and thinking through it, what are you seeing? What patterns or just anecdotes, stories of how assistants are so valuable to business leaders?
Yeah, so it's so interesting. The stories are so varied. Joseph Michelli, who's a famous author who writes books on customer service, he was saying to me that the thing about his assistant was that she increased his business value. She was somebody she actually had an accounting background. And so she always kept him on track when it came to him wanting to go off, be like an entrepreneur and go off and do 10 different things. She'd always bring him back to the business plan that they worked on at the beginning of the year. And she'd say, okay, now, Joseph, are we keeping to this plan? Is this in line with what we intended to do? And he said to me, she actually made me richer. Can you imagine having an executive assistant who makes you richer?
Yes.
I mean, that's an amazing story. But he was willing to listen to her. He trusted her sufficiently where he listened to her. A lot of executives don't listen to their assistants, and that's a big mistake. Donald Trump told me, and when I mentioned Donald Trump, this is before he became president, I interviewed him in 2015. He said to me that his assistant was so valuable to him because she could read situations really well. And she had really good instincts, and she was never afraid to tell him what she thought. And that's a really important thing to do, is to be able to respectfully give your input to your executive, and for them to trust you sufficiently. Obviously, after they've been with you for a while, they have a track record with you and you trust them. But even in the beginning, to be able to give them some confidence, listen to what they're saying, and that was another big thing. And Richard Branson told me that he liked having assistants with whom he could be good friends, because you spend so much time with your assistant on a day-to-day basis that he felt it was really, really important from a personality perspective for them to be able to get along with each other. It's so interesting, too. Steve Forbes told me that his assistant was so capable in getting all of these little things done. He said, that the smallest thing, when she was not there, it would turn into some huge chaotic thing. And the minute she came back in the office, order was restored right away. So these are the kinds of things that they appreciated about their assistants, who were really able to support them and run their office for them.